February 14th, 1943. The Kasserine Pass in Tunisia. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on metal that had already been baking since dawn. Through the swirling dust and acrid smoke of the North African battlefield, German tank commanders in their Panzer IVs watched something that defied everything they knew about armored warfare. American Sherman tanks, scattered across broken terrain with no line of sight between them, moved with a coordination that seemed supernatural. No flag signals, no flares arcing across the desert sky, no dispatch riders racing between vehicles on motorcycles. Yet these American tanks converged on German positions with timing so precise it appeared choreographed. The German crews, veterans of Poland, France, and Russia, had seen excellent coordination before. They had practiced it themselves when their communications worked properly. But this was different. These American tanks operated as if connected by invisible threads, responding to threats before they became critical, supporting each other across ridgelines and wadis where no visual signals could reach. 3 Shermans appeared from behind a rocky outcrop to the north precisely as 2 more emerged from a depression to the east. The timing wasn't just good, it was perfect, synchronized in a way that shouldn't be possible without prearranged signals or direct visual contact. Inside their panzers, German commanders struggled to hear their own platoon leaders through the static that overwhelmed their amplitude modulation radios. The 10-watt FUG-5 transmitters, state-of-the-art by 1930s standards, couldn't penetrate more than a few hundred meters when the tanks were moving. Engine noise, track clanking, and every electrical discharge from spark plugs created interference that turned radio communications into incomprehensible crackle. Most German tanks in the formation carried only receivers, unable to report what they saw or call for help. They could hear orders but couldn't respond. When the command tank with its distinctive multiple antennas took a hit, entire platoons lost coordination, reduced to visual signals and pre-battle planning. The Americans operated with technology the Germans didn't know existed. Every single Sherman tank carried a sophisticated FM radio set, crystal-controlled for precision, pumping out 25 watts of transmission power with clarity that cut through battlefield chaos like a searchlight through fog. 8,000 miles from Detroit's assembly lines, the most decisive technological advantage of World War II was revealing itself in the desert, not in armor thickness, not in gun caliber, but in the invisible electromagnetic waves that connected every American tank crew in ways the Wehrmacht never imagined possible. This wasn't just a technological edge, it was a fundamental reimagining of armored warfare. While German doctrine still relied on rigid hierarchies and visual command, American forces had created the world's first armored battlefield network. Each Sherman was a node in a web of instant communication that transformed how tanks could fight. The revolution had begun quietly on July 22, 1941, when the United States Army standardized a family of radio sets that would change warfare forever. The revolution begins, Motorola's secret weapon. The transformation that would doom German armor supremacy started in an unassuming building in Chicago. The Galvin Manufacturing Company, which would soon become famous as Motorola, employed a brilliant engineer named Daniel E. Noble, who had recently joined as director of research in 1940. Noble had made his reputation designing the nation's first statewide two-way FM radio system for the Connecticut State Police, and he brought to military communications a vision that military planners were only beginning to grasp. Noble's background was crucial to the revolution he would lead. He understood that FM wasn't just a marginal improvement over AM. It was a fundamentally different approach to radio communication. Edwin Armstrong had invented FM technology in the 1930s, but its military applications remained largely unexplored. Most engineers, steeped in decades of AM radio development, saw FM as experimental and unproven. Noble saw it as the future of mobile communications, particularly in the electrically noisy environment of military vehicles. When the Army Signal Corps approached Galvin Manufacturing about developing portable radio equipment for tank use, most manufacturers were focused on improving amplitude modulation systems. AM radios were well understood, relatively simple to produce, and had been the standard for decades. But Noble convinced his team and the military that frequency modulation, FM, represented a quantum leap in battlefield communications. The advantages were revolutionary. FM signals resisted the electrical interference that plagued AM systems. Engine ignition, electrical motors, artillery discharges, all the electromagnetic noise of modern warfare, FM could cut through it with crystalline clarity. Noble assembled a team that would change military history. Henryk Magnuski served as the principal RF engineer, solving the formidable technical challenges of installing sophisticated electronics in the violent environment of a combat vehicle. Marion Bond, Lloyd Morris, and Bill Vogel rounded out the engineering team. Together, they faced a daunting task. They needed to create a radio system that could survive the shock of firing the main gun, the constant vibration of tracked vehicle movement, extreme temperature variations from North African deserts to Russian winters, and still maintain stable, clear communications. The solution they developed became the SCR 508 radio set, standardized on July 22, 1941. This wasn't just an incremental improvement over existing equipment. It was a completely new approach to battlefield communications. The system weighed 181 pounds fully equipped, but those pounds bought capabilities that would prove worth more than additional armor or a larger gun. The SCR 508 transformed every Sherman tank into something unprecedented in military history, a fully networked combat platform. The timing was crucial. While German forces were advancing deep into the Soviet Union in the summer of 1941, using tactics that depended on radio communication between command vehicles, American engineers were perfecting technology that would render German systems obsolete. The Germans didn't know it yet, but they were fighting the last war. The Americans were preparing for the next one. Inside the SCR 508, the technology of victory. At the heart of the SCR 508 system sat the BC604 transmitter, a marvel of electronics for its time. This unit generated 25 watts of power, 2.5 times the output of the German FUG-5. Operating in the 20.0 to 27.9 MHz frequency range, it provided 10 preset channels with crystal-controlled stability. Crystal control meant that frequencies stayed locked precisely where they were set, unlike the variable capacitor tuning in German radios that constantly drifted off frequency as components heated up or cooled down during operations. The dual BC603 receivers gave Sherman commanders a capability German tankers could only dream about. With 2 receivers, a tank commander could monitor his platoon frequency while simultaneously listening to the company command net. Orders flowed down instantly. Situation reports flowed up without delay. When a platoon spotted enemy armor, every tank in the company knew within seconds. When artillery support was needed, coordinates could be transmitted and confirmed in real time. This simultaneous multi-frequency monitoring created a level of battlefield awareness that was simply impossible with single receiver systems. The real revolution lay in frequency modulation itself. Edwin Armstrong's FM technology, licensed to the military, eliminated the static and interference that plagued amplitude modulation systems. In amplitude modulation, the signal strength varies to carry information, which means any electrical noise appears as static in the audio output. Every spark plug firing, every electrical motor starting, every nearby lightning strike, all of it became noise that overwhelmed the signal. German tank radios picked up this electromagnetic pollution as a constant crackle that made communication difficult and often impossible when vehicles were moving. Frequency modulation worked differently. Instead of varying signal strength, FM varied the frequency slightly around a center frequency. This meant that electrical noise, which primarily affected signal amplitude, could be filtered out. The result was clarity that seemed magical to crews who had experienced AM systems. Even during artillery barrages, with high explosive shells creating massive electromagnetic pulses, FM radios delivered clear voice communication. The SCR 508 also integrated the tank's intercom system through BC606 interphone control boxes mounted at each crew station. The driver, assistant driver, gunner, loader, and commander could all communicate internally, and the commander could switch instantly to external radio transmission. This seamless integration meant that spotting enemy tanks, communicating their position to the crew, engaging them, and simultaneously alerting other tanks in the formation happened in a fluid, coordinated dance. Power management provided another American advantage. The SCR-508 operated on either 12 or 24 volts, automatically adjusting to available power through its dynamotor power supply. This system provided stable, filtered power that eliminated electrical interference. German radios powered directly from vehicle electrical systems picked up every voltage fluctuation and spark as static. American engineering had thought through every detail, creating a system designed from the ground up for the harsh realities of armored combat. The German dilemma: superior tanks, inferior networks. The German FUG-5 radio represented competent 1930s technology trapped in a 1940s war. Operating in the 27.0 to 33.3 MHz frequency range, using amplitude modulation, it generated just 10 watts of transmission power. Under ideal conditions, with stationary vehicles, trained operators could achieve ranges of 2 to 3 kilometers for voice communication. But ideal conditions rarely existed on battlefields. When tanks were moving, range dropped to a few hundred meters. Through forests, in mountainous terrain, or in built-up areas, German tank radios often became useless. The production reality was even grimmer. While German doctrine emphasized radio communication, German industrial capacity couldn't provide the equipment the doctrine demanded. In 1943, Germany manufactured approximately 5,700 medium and heavy tanks, but produced fewer than 2,000 FUG-5 transceivers. The math was brutal. Many radios went to command vehicles and assault guns, leaving regular tank units desperately short. A standard German tank platoon of 5 vehicles typically included only 1 or 2 tanks with full transceivers, capable of both transmitting and receiving. The remaining tanks carried FUG-2 receivers only. These tanks could hear orders but couldn't respond or report enemy positions. This created a rigid, hierarchical communication structure that was fundamentally brittle. The platoon leader transmitted orders. Subordinate tanks acknowledged through actions rather than words. When command tanks were destroyed, and they were easily identified by their multiple antennas, making them priority targets, entire platoons lost coordination. Imagine the tactical implications. A German tank crew spots enemy armor at the edge of effective range. In an American unit, they'd immediately radio the position to every tank in the platoon, the company commander, and possibly call for artillery support, all within seconds. In a German unit with only receivers, they could do nothing but engage or attempt to signal the platoon leader visually. By the time visual signals were recognized and orders disseminated, the tactical moment had often passed. Enemy tanks that could have been caught in the open had found cover. Ambush opportunities evaporated. The speed of modern warfare demanded instant communication, but German radio poverty forced them to fight at the speed of visual signals and pre-battle planning. This wasn't incompetence. German radio engineers understood the limitations of their equipment. German tank commanders recognized the vulnerabilities of their communication systems. But German industrial capacity, already strained by fighting on multiple fronts, simply couldn't produce sufficient quantities of radio equipment. The Reich was forced to choose between tanks without radios or no tanks at all. They chose tanks, accepting the communication poverty as an unavoidable reality of total war. The technical specifications told the story in numbers. German FUG-5 AM radio, 10 watts, 2-3 kilometers range when stationary, hundreds of meters when moving, approximately 20% deployment rate with full transceivers in tank units. American SCR-508 FM radio, 25 watts, 10-15 miles range when stationary, 7 miles when moving, 100% deployment rate. These weren't just statistics, they represented fundamentally different philosophies of armored warfare. Guderian's vision, the irony of German radio doctrine. The deepest irony of German radio poverty was that Germany had pioneered radio use in armored warfare. Heinz Guderian, the architect of Blitzkrieg, had insisted on radio equipment in tanks since the 1920s. His book, Achtung Panzer, published in 1937, emphasized communication as essential to armored operations. Guderian understood that rapid armor advances required reliable, instant communication. The aggressive, fast-moving tactics that shocked the world in Poland and France depended on radio coordination that allowed tank units to exploit breakthroughs without waiting for orders to travel through traditional command hierarchies. In the campaigns of 1939 and 1940, German radio superiority over Polish and French forces played a crucial role in victories that rewrote military doctrine. German tank commanders could communicate, coordinate, and concentrate forces with a speed that bewildered defenders still relying on telephones, dispatch riders, and visual signals. The Blitzkrieg wasn't just about tank and air power. It was about networked combined arms operations enabled by radio communication. But by 1943, the same German army that had pioneered radio-coordinated armored warfare found itself unable to provide the radios its own doctrine demanded. Production priorities shifted as Germany fought for survival on multiple fronts. Radio production couldn't keep pace with tank production. The gap between doctrinal requirements and actual capabilities widened into a chasm. Guderian himself, serving as Inspector General of Armored Troops from 1943, recognized the problem but couldn't solve it. In a December 1944 memorandum, he acknowledged that American radio coordination negated German advantages in tank quality. The evolution of German tactics reflected this reality. Early in the war, German doctrine assumed radio communication. By 1943, doctrine increasingly emphasized flag signals, pre-battle planning, and visual coordination precisely because radio communication couldn't be relied upon. The army that had taught the world about mobile warfare found itself reverting to communication methods from an earlier era. This wasn't regression by choice. It was adaptation to industrial constraints that no amount of tactical brilliance could overcome. First Contact, Operation Torch, and North Africa. November 8, 1942. Operation Torch brought American armor to North Africa. The 2nd Armored Division's tanks rolled off landing craft near Safi and Fadala, their SCR-508 radios already proving their worth. Coordinating with naval forces, maintaining communication with landing force commanders, tracking friendly units across unfamiliar terrain, the American radios performed flawlessly under conditions that would have paralyzed German communications. The first encounters with Vichy French forces showcased advantages that would only grow more pronounced against German opponents. American tank commanders could coordinate attacks, warn each other of threats, and call for artillery support through crystal-clear FM communications. When scattered elements of American forces needed to regroup, radio contact maintained unit cohesion, even when visual contact was impossible. The Afrika Korps, despite being the Wehrmacht's most experienced armored force, operated under severe communication limitations that American forces didn't yet fully appreciate. German signals intelligence units intercepted American transmissions and noted their exceptional clarity and coordination. The 10th Panzer Division's intelligence section reported that American units maintained communication at ranges where German radios produced only static. More disturbing was the realization that every American tank appeared capable of full transmission, not just command vehicles. The Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943 provided the first major test. Though tactically a German victory, as inexperienced American forces were pushed back with heavy losses, the battle revealed capabilities that stunned Wehrmacht observers. During the confused fighting, scattered elements of the U.S. 1st Armored Division maintained coordination across 50 miles of battlefield. Tank crews who had never met coordinated attacks warned each other of threats and called for support through radio networks that seemed to function independently of traditional command structures. German after-action reports from Kasserine noted the Americans' communication superiority but attributed it to training rather than technology. This fundamental misunderstanding would persist throughout the war. German intelligence analysts, aware of their own radio limitations, apparently couldn't conceive that the Americans might have achieved technological superiority in this domain. They saw the effects, documented the coordination, but consistently failed to grasp the technological foundation that made it possible. Mountains and Valleys, the Italian Campaign. September 1943 brought American armor to Italy, where mountainous terrain should have negated any radio advantage. Instead, FM technology proved even more valuable in conditions that rendered German AM radios completely useless. The physics of radio propagation in mountainous terrain favored frequency modulation's resistance to multipath interference. When signals bounced off valley walls and ridgelines, AM radios received multiple out-of-phase copies of the same signal, creating destructive interference and garbled audio. FM handled these multiple signal paths far better, maintaining clarity where AM produced only static. American tanks coordinated movements through terrain where visual signals were impossible, and German radios failed completely. During the advance toward Monte Cassino, American armored units demonstrated capabilities that defied German understanding. Tank platoons separated by ridgelines coordinated attacks with precision that German doctrine insisted required visual contact. Commanders positioned on opposite sides of mountains maintained constant communication, sharing intelligence, coordinating movements, and calling for support as if they could see each other. The 1st Armored Division's after-action reports described routine coordination at distances where German radios produced only static. Company commanders could talk to battalion headquarters while simultaneously monitoring platoon nets. Artillery fire missions could be called in and adjusted in real time, with tank commanders acting as forward observers. This level of integration between armor and artillery created a combined arms capability that German forces couldn't match with their fragmented communication systems. The Italian campaign also revealed another dimension of American radio superiority: reliability. The SCR 508 systems, designed for harsh environments and careful manufacturing, kept working through Italian winters and brutal combat conditions. German radios, increasingly manufactured under wartime constraints with substitute materials and less skilled labor, became less reliable as the war progressed. Maintenance was difficult, replacement parts scarce, skilled radio operators rare. The gap between American and German capabilities widened, not just because American technology was better, but because American equipment stayed working while German equipment progressively failed. D-Day and network warfare's coming of age, June 6, 1944. As Sherman tanks rolled off landing craft at Normandy beaches, their SCR 508 radios maintained contact with naval fire support. Coordination impossible with German technology operating on different frequency ranges. But the hedgerow fighting revealed both the power and a critical limitation of the American radio network. Tank radios operated on 20.0 to 27.9 MHz. Infantry radios, the SCR 300 backpack sets, operated on 40.0 to 48.0 MHz. The two systems couldn't talk to each other. This communication gap proved deadly in the Bocage, the hedgerow country of Normandy. German infantry with Panzerfausts could approach American tanks, while nearby American infantry had no way to warn them. Tank crews couldn't see infantry in the thick hedgerows. Infantry couldn't communicate directly with tanks about threats they spotted. Men died in the gap between frequency bands. American innovation solved the problem within weeks. Tank crews mounted EE-8 field telephones in ammunition boxes welded to tank exteriors, wired directly to internal communications. Infantry could literally plug in and talk to the crew. This simple modification revolutionized tank-infantry cooperation. By Operation Cobra in late July, American combined arms coordination reached new levels of effectiveness. Infantry could warn tanks of threats. Tanks could request infantry support for clearing buildings. The network expanded beyond tank-to-tank to encompass the entire combined arms team. Operation Cobra, July 25 to 30, 1944, demonstrated the full potential of American radio superiority. The 2nd Armored Division, commanded by Major General Edward H. Brooks, coordinated over 200 Sherman tanks through radio networks that enabled unprecedented battlefield control. Every tank could report enemy positions instantly. Tank destroyers received targeting information from tanks they couldn't see. Artillery observers in Sherman command tanks called in devastating barrages within minutes of target identification. German defenders from the Panzer Lehr Division faced an enemy that seemed to possess supernatural awareness. American tanks responded instantly to threats reported by other units miles away. When one American tank spotted German armor, every friendly unit in the sector knew immediately. Coordinated attacks struck from unexpected directions. Artillery fire seemed to anticipate German movements. Panzerlehr, once Germany's premier armored division, had been reduced to communication poverty. Most tanks operated without radios, depending on visual signals in terrain, where visibility rarely exceeded 100 meters. The few functioning radios suffered from interference and limited range that prevented effective coordination. Industrial might, the numbers, tell the story. The statistics revealed the magnitude of American achievement and German failure. American SCR 508, 528, and 538 family radios, over 50,000 units produced. Sherman tanks produced 49,324 units. Radio deployment rate 100%. Every single Sherman that left the assembly line carried sophisticated FM radio equipment. This wasn't a luxury or an advantage for elite units. It was standard. A private fresh from training drove a tank with the same communication capability as a division commander's command vehicle. German production told a different story. Fuji 5 transceivers, approximately 6,000 units produced during the war. Medium and heavy tanks produced approximately 12,000 units. Full transceiver deployment rate, approximately 20%. 4 out of 5 German tanks lacked the ability to both send and receive radio messages. The communication poverty extended beyond simple lack of equipment. Production of replacement parts, training of radio operators, maintenance of existing equipment, all suffered as German industry struggled under Allied bombing and resource shortages. Motorola's Chicago factory represented American industrial mobilization at peak efficiency. Before the war, the company manufactured car radios. Converting to military production required complete retooling and solving unprecedented technical challenges. Each SCR 508 required 2,748 individual components manufactured to demanding standards. The BC 604 transmitter alone contained 474 capacitors and 385 resistors. Crystal oscillators had to maintain frequency stability despite temperature extremes and combat vibration. The production timeline demonstrated American industrial capacity. 1942, 3,800 SCR 508 family radios produced. 1943, 11,400 units. 1944, 24,000 units. Total wartime production, over 50,000 tank radio sets. This production miracle ensured that all 49,324 Sherman tanks manufactured during the war received sophisticated radio equipment. No other nation approached this achievement. The Soviet Union struggled to equip even 25% of their tanks with any radios. British production couldn't meet demand, leading them to adopt American radio designs. Germany, pioneer of radio-coordinated armor warfare, couldn't equip half their tanks with transceivers. The psychological dimension, connected versus isolated. The psychological impact of radio superiority profoundly affected how men experienced tank warfare. American crews fought with the knowledge they were never alone, even when physically isolated, separated from friendly units by terrain or distance. They remained connected through radio waves. If they spotted enemy armor, they could warn others. If they were hit, they could call for help. If they were advancing, they knew exactly where friendly units were positioned. This constant connection created a sense of security that went beyond tactical advantages. German tank crews experienced the opposite, profound isolation. Unable to communicate with most of their own unit, they fought individual battles within larger engagements. A German tank crew might see enemy armor in the distance but have no way to report it. They might take fire from an unseen position, but couldn't call for support. When they advanced, they often didn't know if friendly units were supporting their flanks or had been destroyed. Every movement felt like venturing alone into the unknown. Otto Carius, one of Germany's most successful tank commanders with over 150 confirmed kills, wrote candidly about the challenges of limited communications. Though he focused primarily on tactical aspects rather than dwelling on communication gaps, the isolation permeates his memoir, Tigers in the Mud. The constant uncertainty, the inability to know what was happening beyond visual range, the frustration of watching opportunities slip away because coordination was impossible. These experiences marked every German tanker's war. For American crews, the radio network created a collective intelligence that transformed combat effectiveness. If one tank spotted an enemy position, every tank in the network knew immediately. If artillery needed adjustment, tank commanders could provide real-time feedback. If a route proved impassable, the information propagated instantly. The network made every American tank crew smarter than any individual German crew, regardless of experience or skill. This psychological advantage compounded tactical superiority. American tankers advanced with confidence because they knew support was always just a radio call away. German tankers advanced into uncertainty, never sure if help would arrive if needed. The mental burden of isolation, the stress of operating without information, these intangible factors degraded German combat effectiveness in ways that didn't appear in tactical manuals, but were felt in every engagement. Intelligence failure. Germany never understood. Throughout the war, German intelligence failed to grasp the significance of American communication superiority. Combat reports mentioned American coordination, but attributed it to training rather than technology. A captured September 1944 intelligence assessment stated, American tank units demonstrate good radio discipline and coordination. This appears to result from extensive training and rigid communication procedures. The report completely missed the technological foundation. German tactics never adapted to American capabilities. They continued targeting supposed command tanks based on antenna configurations, not realizing every Sherman could assume command functions. They planned ambushes assuming American tanks would lose coordination when separated, not understanding that radio contact maintained unit cohesion regardless of visual contact. They positioned forces to exploit what they thought were communication vulnerabilities that simply didn't exist in American formations. This persistent blindness represented one of World War II's great intelligence failures. Despite countless battlefield encounters demonstrating American coordination advantages, German leadership never prioritized solving their critical communication weakness. They continued building superior tanks that fought as isolated individuals, while American forces built adequate tanks that fought as coordinated teams. The technological gap was visible in every engagement, documented in every after-action report, yet never addressed systematically. Part of the failure stemmed from German assumptions. Having pioneered radio-coordinated armored warfare, German officers apparently found it inconceivable that they had fallen behind technologically. They knew their own radio limitations, accepted them as inevitable wartime constraints, and assumed American forces operated under similar constraints. When American coordination exceeded what German radios could achieve, they attributed it to training, tactics, or numerical superiority, anything except a fundamental technological advantage. Legacy. The dawn of network-centric warfare. The radio superiority of Sherman tanks established principles that govern armored warfare today. Modern main battle tanks carry communication suites that trace their lineage directly to the SCR 508. Digital rather than analog, but fundamentally based on the same concepts: universal deployment, reliable coordination, integrated combined arms operations. The lesson learned in North Africa, Italy, France, and Germany was simple but profound. In modern combat, connection equals survival and isolation equals defeat. The German Bundeswehr, rebuilt in the 1950s, prioritized communications based on World War II lessons. Every Leopard tank manufactured has carried comprehensive radio systems. A Bundeswehr training manual explicitly states, "The defeat of superior German tanks by inferior American vehicles with superior radios teaches that information dominance outweighs platform superiority." The German military that learned this lesson the hard way ensured future generations wouldn't repeat the mistake. Modern conflicts validate this lesson repeatedly. In the 1991 Gulf War, coalition forces with superior communications destroyed Iraqi forces equipped with individually superior Soviet-designed tanks, but inferior communications and coordination. Iraqi tanks often didn't know where friendly units were positioned. They couldn't coordinate defenses effectively. They fought as isolated platforms against a networked enemy, and they were destroyed in detail. The pattern established in 1943 repeated itself in 1991. Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003 demonstrated that network-centric warfare defeats platform-centric warfare. American forces with real-time data links, GPS navigation, and comprehensive communication systems achieved victory ratios that would have seemed impossible based purely on weapon specifications. The lesson from Sherman tanks in Normandy applied to Abrams tanks in Baghdad. The connected defeat the isolated, the networked overcome the individually superior. The electromagnetic spectrum became a domain of warfare as crucial as land, sea, or air. The invisible radio waves connecting Sherman tank crews in 1943 were the ancestors of modern data links, satellite communications, and network-centric warfare doctrine. Every drone strike coordinated through satellite links, every artillery barrage called in through digital communications, every combined arms operation executed through shared battlefield awareness, all trace their conceptual lineage to those FM radios in Sherman tanks. The story of American Sherman tank radio superiority represents more than a technical advantage. It marks the moment when warfare fundamentally changed. From that point forward, victory would increasingly depend not just on weapons and warriors, but on information dominance and network coordination. The Germans discovered this too late, learning on battlefields across 3 continents that electromagnetic superiority could be more decisive than armor superiority. Every Sherman tank carried the tools of victory, not just in its 75mm gun or sloped armor, but in those 100 to as near as 71 pounds of radio equipment that connected its crew to every other American tank crew. This connection created a collective intelligence that no individual German tank, regardless of superiority in armor or firepower, could match. The transformation occurred largely invisible to German forces until far too late. By the time German commanders understood that every Sherman possessed communication capabilities most German tanks lacked, the war was effectively decided. In the end, the electromagnetic waves carried by SCR 508 radios proved more powerful than the armor-piercing rounds fired by German 80mm guns. The ability to coordinate, to share information instantly, to fight as a unified force rather than as individual vehicles, this invisible advantage determined victory more surely than any visible superiority in armor or armament. Sherman tanks changed warfare forever, establishing the principle that in modern combat, connection equals survival and isolation equals defeat. German troops discovered this reality too late, learning that the Americans possess not just numerical superiority, but technological superiority in the dimension that mattered most: the ability to fight as one. If you found this deep dive into World War II's hidden technological revolution interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There's so much more fascinating history to explore together. Stories of innovation and adaptation that changed the course of human events. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.